Good evening. It's a few minutes before 7, so we're going to be gathering together and getting started here in about 5 minutes. Well, good evening, church. My name is Teresa Albright, one of the pastoral associates here at Visitation, and I'm the staff liaison to the parish faith formation team. It is my privilege to welcome you tonight on behalf of that team and its chair, Tasha Batts. Please raise your hand if you are on the faith formation team. So these are the people who read all those books and landed on Mr. Brooks's memoir for our parish book this year. I want to begin with a few housekeeping notes before introducing our hosts and our honored guest. First, you'll notice a yellow bookmark on the tables. This is our gift to you, and we hope you use it as you dig into Alvin Brooks's memoir. You also see a program outlining the order of our evening. If this is your first time at Visitation, you can find restrooms down that hallway and then to your left. We also have water over here if you need some water. So please do make yourself at home. In helping us create a welcoming atmosphere tonight, I want to especially thank the Honorable Sandy Midkiff for gifting us with music as we arrived. And now for some introductions. I want to begin by introducing our first host, Lorraine Gordon. After a successful career in education, Lorraine continues to guide young minds as a writing consultant for students applying for college. As a member of the Faith Formation team, she is also the host of our Viz on Main podcast. And she's getting ready to record its 4th season this spring. So stay tuned. Lorraine is an avid reader and a proud grandmother of twin boys growing up in Shanghai. Please welcome Lorraine Gordon. Next up is Pat Fanning. Pat grew up at 75th and Troost and credits his parents for the person he is today. He says that because of them, advocacy is in his genetic makeup. He is an accomplished attorney at peak litigation, where the work he does affects real people with real problems. In addition to being a liturgical minister here, Pat is a proud Visitation school dad, where he coaches cross country for our parish children. Please welcome Pat Fanning. Finally, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest of honor for tonight, Mr. Alvin L. Brooks. I can honestly say that there have been only a handful of people at whose feet I could sit and listen to them tell stories all day long. The first was my dearly departed grandmother, Marie Merle Lafferty. Another was Rabbi Morris B. Margulies of Kansas City. May his memory continue to be a blessing. And now I can sincerely add Mr. Brooks to the list after meeting him in person for the first time while visiting the Black Archives down at the 18th and Vine District a few weeks ago. We had a nice long conversation and I could have listened to him all day. I am very glad that his children convinced him to finally write down the stories of his life. What is it about the power of stories? We as Christians, in the deepest parts of our soul, know how the story of one solitary life has the power to not only transform the world, but to reconcile what we thought was irreconcilable. And we celebrate this mysterious power of a life story each time we gather around the Eucharistic table. Alvin Brooks is certainly an accomplished man of service, passion, and advocacy. His story, still being written, has left an indelible mark on the communities and the people of Kansas City and beyond. His is a life that has always bended toward justice. From his time as a Kansas City police officer to his work creating the ad hoc group against crime. Mr. Brooks is an active member of his parish, St. Monica's. He was married to Carol, his queen, for 63 years before her passing. He is a proud father, grandfather, great-grandfather. How many great-grandchildren do you have?
I think it's 44. We had 2 born within the last 6 weeks.
Yes, we did. So, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Alvin Brooks, who will open our evening with a prayer.
Thank you very much. Can we all stand and hold hands, if you will, please? Even if you don't know the person. If you don't like them, hold hands anyway. Let us humble ourselves, if we will, and place ourselves in the presence of the Creator and each other. God, our Creator of every living being. And more specifically, us gathered here, your children, who were made in your likeness and your image. As we get here, oh God, we know you are present. This is hallowed ground, because although it's a building called visitation, without us here, there would be no usefulness for this building. And so we thank you. We thank you for this moment in time that we've come together to discuss an issue, oh God, that's gone with us as we read scriptures, whether it's the Torah or the Bible, the struggles of humanity. And oh God, I don't believe that you intended us to live as we live, but be humble, serving each other as brothers and sisters, as those who are in the likeness and image of you. Therefore, oh God, we're connected because you've done it so. And as we proceed this evening, oh God, help us to come up with some conscience-pricking conversation, some self-analysis, looking at self, each one of us, from a perspective of who am I, a person of faith, in relationship to those things that afflict us, that keep us from being what you would have us to be. Now God, this is our prayer. And we bring these prayers to you through your Son, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And God, we know that you hear our prayers. And these are our prayers. Amen and amen. Amen.
I think it's fitting that Mr. Brooks began and led this event with a prayer. What Pat and I...
Turn yours off.
I'm trying. I know how to work the button. We think we got it.
So anyway, to get back to the fact that Mr. Brooks began this evening with prayer by leading us in prayer, and Pat and I, and with the help of many members of the Faith Formation team, tried to discern a number of themes that we thought were really very important to his memoir. And we thought we would address some of those themes tonight. And I want to start by addressing the theme of prayer. one of the things that I noticed, Mr. Brooks, is that very, very early on in your life, you had a model for prayer, your mother. And there were times when she was discouraged, when she was concerned about you and how you've been treated, that she resorted to a ritual that involved prayer. It involved you kneeling next to her, your head in her lap, her reading from verses in the New Testament, her singing, "Take my hand, precious Lord," and also a prayer for you, that you would grow up to be the young man that God wanted you to be. So that was a prayer, I think, as a mother.
I'm so sorry.
Let's see if this helps.
Okay, does that help?
No.
Sorry.
Maybe that's worse.
Okay, is that better? Is that better? Okay.
When I speak, I'll turn it back on.
Okay, sorry about that. So anyway, back to your mother, and her prayer was a prayer, I think, of supplication. It was a prayer asking God for providence, for protection for herself and for her son. But the thing that I found remarkable about the prayers, the times in the book that you mentioned prayer, and that we see you praying, I mean, they're ubiquitous throughout the book. I mean, you deliver a baby and you're asking everybody to pray. There's so many times when you stop, and the thing that I noticed is that more often than not, you were thanking God. And I want to know, Mr. Brooks, given all the experiences you've had, all the challenges you've had, all the obstacles that have been put in your path, why is that instinctive impulse to thank God? What is it about you that makes you so grateful?
I'm going to stand, and before I do it, let me thank my St. Monica members. Would you stand, please, the St. Monica members back there, wherever you might be. Thank you. Thank you so very much. That's my support, and I also want to mention one of my spiritual advisors is here also, Father Tom Parent. Father Tom is here. Well, my family, my adopted family, Plessy and Stell Brooks, were not religious people in the sense of church. I only remember my mother going to church one time when one of her best friends passed. And the Armstrongs would take me to Sunday school. And then when I grew old enough, going to church. And then, you know, though you read the book, I was married young, and I was baptized in the Baptist church. My wife was in the Pentecostal church. And then we wanted our son, Ron, who was, when he turned 5, to go to Catholic school, St. Joseph. And at St. Monica's, St. Monica, and then went to St. Joseph's church. And then we had to go through catechism and all that kind of stuff, so we decided, so we'd go one Sunday to Carol's church, one Sunday to my church, and every Sunday to St. Joseph, which was a part of St. Monica. And so we decided, maybe you can't beat them, join them. So we became converted, and all of our 6 children were born Catholic. And I think that although my mother and my dad were not, as I saw, practicing Christians or any faith, the way that they lived was as good as anyone who practiced their faith. And they always told me about God, about my purpose in life, and that if I did the right things, that God would bless me. That they never allowed the color of my skin to keep me from doing the best that I could, and never use that as an excuse. that I was made in the likeness of God, and therefore everyone that I met was my brother and my sister. And so I live that way now at 89. I know I don't look a day over 110, but at the same time, I try to live that way. I have one daughter, Diana, who's still up, the fourth of my 5 daughters. And that's the way we try to raise our daughters. And the great-grands and great-greats that we had a connection with, we tried to instill that in them. So that's what made me what I am. And all the bios that you read makes you sound good. But the root of all that is what was instilled in me at an early age by my parents, who I love so dearly, who did so much for me as their child who was adopted. And as you know, who read the book, I didn't know I was adopted. I was 22 years old. But there's nothing that Estelle Brooks, she would have died for me. And I know that.
I want to refer to a scene that occurs in the book. Some of you who've read the book will remember this. Some of you haven't. It's a good reason to read it. It goes back to this nature of prayer and gratitude. There's a moment in Mr. Brooks's life where he really thinks that his career as a policeman might be over. There had been a scene, there had been a shooting, and a very popular, well-liked, well-regarded officer was killed, and the suspect was fleeing, and the suspect was Herschel. And Mr. Brooks was in pursuit, and the other officers and the other policemen around him kept saying, shoot him, but the man was unarmed. And it was clear that he would be captured, and so Mr. Brooks did not shoot him. But he understood that not having shot this man who was a suspect but unarmed was an unpopular action to take. So that night, he and Carol, his wife, go home. She is at home. And they pray, and this is the prayer. Oh God, we thank you for another day, your day. We want to pray for Mrs. Kenner, this is the name, the widow of the policeman, in the loss of her husband tonight. Please comfort her and her family, and Herschel and his family. Thank you, God, for our family, whom you've blessed, the 2 of us and our children. God, I pray I did the right and just thing tonight by not killing the man who killed Officer Kenner. I believe you were there with both of us. Continue to guide me that I may do the things that are just and pleasing to you. God, what I face today is in your hands. Let your will be done. In Jesus' name we pray. That prayer to me, or that prayer captured both the depth of your faith, but also in the midst of your being concerned about losing this career, you were still thanking God, and I find that amazing.
Thank you. I got a little teary-eyed there because I hadn't reached my probationary period. I came on June 1, 1954, and this was the 5th of May, 1954, in the year of probation. And the major who was in charge of investigation had been told that I had a chance to shoot her, so I didn't know it was her at the time, although I did know him, but I didn't know it at the time. 2 of my white colleagues who had pistols emptied their pistols at her, so they were trying to go over this fence. And then when I had my spotlight on him, I could see his hand, they kept saying, shoot the bastard, shoot the bastard. And I didn't shoot him. Someone told the major that I didn't shoot him, and at that time, Bill Kennedy had been pronounced dead. And when I walked up where the group of officers were after I secured the car and the shotgun that he had shot Bill Kennedy, and I heard the major Eugene Pond said, "Where is the son of a bitch?" And as I walked up there, he was about 5'4", I'm 5'11". He poked me in the chest and told me what I wasn't. This is my last day on the job. I was no good. I was no better than the one. And by that time, they'd come over the air. The Bill Kenner had expired. And he said, "You're no better than some of the bitch that killed Bill Kenner. This is your last night on the job." And I don't know what made me stand there as a rookie cop and say, "Major, are you finished?" And he said, "You're goddamn right." I said, "Major, you and nobody else can tell me when you killed somebody." And I turned around and walked me back down to my car and waited for the CSI people to come. And I kind of prayed all that time. And then when I got home, I told my wife what happened. And my brother-in-law who had picked me up at the station, and I was telling him about it, and my wife, and I said, I think this is my last night working. But God works in mysterious ways. And it's interesting. When I went to work that next afternoon, on my shift, it was the evening shift, the lieutenant and the group gave me an ovation. And I got a letter of commendation to the Board of Police Commissioners. God is God and present in our lives.
Mr. Brooks, I am going to follow up a little bit more on the Catholic side of your faith. But first, I just want to say the prayers are working. You're 89 years old, and I'm sitting here watching you think, well, I won't even run for mayor again. I know it's a lot of work, but it's just amazing to listen to you speak. And I want to talk to you a little bit about your Catholic faith as it has developed. I thought one of the things that really moved me in your book was your discussion of when your father passed, and the fact that you had his service in Annunciation Parish, and Father Egan had performed it, and it really, for some reason, moved me that your father, who you had said did not really have a lot of formal religion in his life, went through a Catholic service, and it just kind of showed me, so what has the Catholic Church meant to you over your life? And I realize that is a loaded question, so I'm looking forward to the answer.
Well, I'm Catholic most of the time. But that was Father Moser, Victor Moser, that did that.
He did that.
Father Moser was Annunciation. There was a time when I was ready to leave the church because of some things that were happening. We were at St. Joseph, and then we moved into the Annunciation Parish. At that time, and I don't know whether it was true throughout the diocese, but there were districts. You know, the Annunciation boundaries. Any of you experienced the same thing? Yes. There were boundaries, and the boundary for Annunciation was 27th Street to 39th Street, the east city limits to Brooklyn, if you're familiar with Kansas City. And that community was in transition from black to white because of the building, the land clearance, and the redevelopment of the freeway of I-70 and all that, and people being uprooted. That was the reason why we moved from 2632 Park to 36 Agnes, but the house on Park was my mother-in-law's, the family home, and we wanted a home of our own. 13th of October 1960, we moved there. But I found it after a while that our white colleagues, at that time we went and kneeled at the rail to take the Eucharist. And the whites would run up there real quick before the blacks got there, so they wouldn't have to drink after us. And I noticed that over time, and I thought that maybe black folks are just a little slow getting up, but no, white folks are going fast. So it wasn't Victor Moses, Monsignor Moses was not there then. It was another priest, and I tried to remember who that was. But I said to him, I said, Father, have you noticed when you give communion that the white parishioners tend to rush first, many of them? He said, Al, I hadn't noticed. I said, well, notice it next Sunday. And the next Sunday, more than any other Sunday, folks are just bumping. And when you know, at that time, you stand in line. And so after church, I said, you notice it? I said, what can you say? And he said, I don't know what to say. And then our school on Sunday was integrated. But the bishop allowed the white parents to go to the white parishes outside of those boundaries, which meant during school time, the school was majority black. Then I had a little smart girl who was the second of my five. The year of the riot, Monsignor Moser was there then, and I won't name the other church, it's not important. But they wanted to do an exchange program. These are 8th graders. She was 12 years old. And so the parents, the white parents from this parish and the black parents from our parish got together and we had an exchange program where they were all 8th graders. And let them volunteer those that wanted to go. So we volunteered Carrie, which was a mistake. So at one of the meetings, we'd meet at one time at this particular parish, one time at our parish. And at one of the time they met at our parish, the lady who was one of the co-chairs of the committee for this particular parish said, well, we've been thinking about this and we met. So why don't we try to let the Annunciation kids come out of our school the first semester and see how that works. And then the next semester, then we'll have the exchange program. And Carrie blurted out, well, Daddy, if they don't want to come down here, why do we have to go out there? And I decided to allow that to resonate for a while. Because it was profound. And Father Moses said, Carrie, that's a good thought. And it ended up that Carrie went out. It was cross-busing. When Carrie got out there, then the nuns allowed the kids and 8th graders in that school to line up on one side, and the kids from Annunciation on the other side. And Carrie said, we're supposed to be out here integrated. Why are we integrated? So Carrie was sent back because she was in trouble. And I was about at that time to say, give it up. Because I can serve God in any place, in any faith. But I hung in there because of my kids. And my wife and I, we were ready to hang it up. And so that sustained me, oh God sustained me, prayer sustained me. And meeting some great people of faith within our faith that said, hang in there. God was still with you wherever you are. And so here I am now. That was 1968, a couple of years ago. And I'm still praying. But it's interesting, of all of our 6 children, only one remained a Catholic, and that's Diane is here. Because of some of the kinds of things that they have seen that they didn't feel that they were getting out of our church.
In reading the book, you will meet a lot of characters. There are a lot of men in the book who, some of us, we recognize their names. There are men we meet that we haven't met. Men were introduced that we haven't met and we learn a lot about. The thing that intrigued me as I read the book was how many women there were in the book and the way in which they were given tribute. Mr. Brooks, I was struck by your willingness as a writer, because a writer has to make choices about who you include, who you don't include, how many women you included. And some of the women played minor roles in their life. Mrs. Fagan, who's always looking out for a good job for you, and Mrs. McCoy, who was Carol's grandmother, who was definitely a pretty central character. You had Miss Williams, who was the neighbor who I think was helping your family. So there are these characters, and of course then there are the family characters. There are your mother, your birth mother, Thomasine, your adopted mother, Estelle, your mother-in-law, Mrs. Ridge, and of course, your beloved wife, Carol, and your 5 daughters. And you write about these women so lovingly, and especially Carol. I mean, we see her as although she said, you know, I want to be married and have a lot of kids, she was definitely your partner. She was your mentor. She shared so much with you. She was active and core. So my question for you as a woman interested in reading about women is, what did you admire most about the women that you wrote about, as they, not only as the role they played shaping a family, but shaping a community?
You know, when I wrote that, I never thought about what you've asked me. But those were just the women in my life who had such a great influence on me as a teenager. We used to joke about it. If Carol were here, I'd say, Carol went and got pregnant. Now I say, I got Carol pregnant. But nobody said to us, get married, or are you going to get married? Some strange, and this is why God has been so much a part of my life and my family's life. I just know it. I don't know about the rest of you, but I know I'm one of God's special kids. I just know that. I know that. Because who'd have thought as an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old getting married, being black, in segregated America, segregated Kansas City? Being dealt with because of the color of my skin and my wife's skin and my family's skin. But all of those women were able to undergird me in faith, as well as support me, not as a boy, but as a man even at 18. And my wife as a woman at 15. And for your information, our love song with Nat King Cole's Too Young, you might want to do it. It ends with that. They found that we're not really too young at all. That kept us together for 63 years, and she was living the 23rd of August, and been 71 years. But all of those had an effect upon not only me, but my family. And they were like they were like parents to us. Miss McCoy, who was my wife's Carol's grandmother, very religious, Pentecostal, very religious. And some things she said wasn't in the book. I think part some of it. But she was a strong black woman who wouldn't pull Carol aside when she pulled both of us together and tell us about womanhood. And although she was a woman, talk to me about manhood, being black and a black man. And so all that together made me, and if Carol for 63 years, actually when she passed away, she was I can't do the math right now, but made her a great woman, great wife, a great mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother. And in her service, they did a memorial service for her that evening before the funeral. The pastor crowd, and we couldn't do it at the Annunciation, at St. Martin, because it was all too much of a crowd. But the kids, our kids and grandkids, got up and spoke. A limited number of them that spoke because of the time. Talked about how she, as young as boys and girls, did the same thing to them that Carol's grandmother had done for herself and her. That's what sustained us. And that's what, now with Carol, she was certainly the wind under my wings. you really don't belong to this family, you belong to the community. So go on out there and be with your community, and I'll take care of the family. That didn't happen, that almost happened literally, because I gave so much, because I was asked of so much. And just before I came here, I got a call from a man who for 40 years had been shot several times and just cut him off 2 weeks ago with his medication. And somebody gave him my number to call. Mr. Brooks, can you help me, because I'm going through my anxiety attacks because I haven't got my medication. And I told him, I told him I'm going to be here. I said, well, when I get out, I don't know what I can do, but I'll see what I can do. And God has put people in my life, like Father Tom Kern and others, that undergirds who I am, my faith, my manhood, my being the kind of man, father, great, and on down. So that's what the women did. And now my daughters, speaking of that, I've got 5 daughters. And all of them need to be committed. But they look after me like I'm their child. Where you going? Where you been? What you eating? What's that good good? Who you with? All I said, listen, I'm grown. Almost anyway. I'm the daddy. But I love it. I love that kind of attention. And they're doing the best they can to take the place of their mom. The best they can. And they do a pretty good job of it. Seriously.
Before I get to my next question, which is going to get into the community aspects, I think it's time for a little plug for this book. If this hasn't been enough of a plug for this book already. I've been on the faith formation team here for several years. Every year we have a book. Most of the rest of the faith formation team truly believes I've never actually picked up one of the books. And this isn't confession, so I don't have to say anything. And I found they don't make many of these books into movies, so it has been challenging for me. But in order to get to speak tonight, in order to get to visit with you, one of the things that was said in the email to me, he said, and you need to read the book. I have to tell you, I couldn't put it down. It's the story, it's your journey, and Teresa touched on it. It's the amount of faith that can be drawn from one man's journey and a life well lived and what you've done and what you've done every single day of your life is amazing, and it's truly moving. And the other piece of it is it's also the history of Kansas City. It's the good, bad, and the ugly of Kansas City. And I found myself every time you get to a certain spot, I pull out the little map on my phone to figure out where you were in Kansas City as you were going through these situations. And so you tell the last 87 years of Kansas City history in that book, because I don't think we got your first 2 years, but it's just amazing. And the reason I segue that is I want to talk about community a little bit more. And you touched on what Carolyn said, which you are a treasure to our community and always have been. And you have given your life to this community. But has the community, what has it given back to you? How have you benefited from this community? I think all the way back to the fact that you might not be here if somebody in your community didn't figure out that you needed goat's milk, right? I mean, that's community at the very beginning. And then taking that all the way to the ad hoc group on crime, which you formed and got together with these gentlemen and families that walked around, and what you did to revolutionize finding a way to get drug houses out of neighborhoods at a time when that was still an epidemic, still an epidemic we deal with, but truly something that was revolutionary. This is all the community stuff. And I don't want to get into the story, but I just love the story of you and those police tickets. And people need to read that book about the police tickets and how you pulled that off. That's good old-fashioned, old school, taking care of business in the community. And so, just want to talk to you a little bit briefly. I mean, what has this community meant to you for all that you've given to it? What have you gotten in return from it?
Well, This community's been good to me in every respect. I've been a victim of racism, even in my adult life. But that never set me back. I've received all kinds of accolades and those kind of things that I didn't ask for. I've never jumped in front of a camera and said, hey, you need to interview me. I never said you need to give me an award. I never said you need to do this or that. But the community's been good to me, and I hope that I've done as much for the community as it has done for me. I've had unexpected things to occur that never would have occurred if, and forgive me, but I'm not going to ask you to forgive me or apologize, because God was a part of it. Some things have happened that just, and it's because even with the ad-hoc group against crime, or even with the police department, although I couldn't get a promotion and left, it's interesting that Clarence Kelly, who was the chief, and the day I resigned on Halloween 1964, his son was there. He was a senior at Southwest High School. And I asked for an exit interview. And his son was there, and he said, why don't you go outside? I said, Chief, I'd like your son to stay, because what I've got to say affects him. And I told him about the department, about the climate, about the condition of the department, about the city, Kansas City, of which he was the chief of the department. When I was appointed by George H.W. Bush to serve a 3-year term on the President Drug Advisory Council, 3 or 4 times a month I flew back and forth from here to Washington, and ended up flying out with Clarence Kelly. And those early 7 o'clock flights weren't too crowded, and we started sitting together. Never talked about the police department, never talked about my conversation with him. And he was the commencement speaker at St. Missouri State University, and I was at the University of St. Missouri. And I was on the Board of Regents. And I heard him say to the president, Lovinger, is that Alvin Brooks sitting over there? He said, yeah, he's the vice president of the Board of Regents. So when he spoke to 13,000 people in Kennedy Stadium outside, he said, I want to digress from my speech for just a moment and make an apology. He said, Mr. Brooks, one of your regents, was a police officer during my tenure. He said, I want to apologize to you, Mr. Brooks, because I had to go to the FBI before I understood what you was telling me about the day you resigned. And we became very close thereafter. When he passed away, they had a memorial service for him with the funeral home there at Linwood and Village. And because of the FBI director, people were there from all over the world, and it was lying all the way down to 32nd Street Terrace. And I got there an hour before that, but people were already there. And someone, when I got on my car and I started across, I hadn't planned to cut the line. And somebody said, come on. I said, no, come on. So they said, come on, everybody agreed. And just it took me about a half hour to get inside, a little longer. And I was 25, 30, maybe 40 persons to the back. You know how you look around to see how far you are and everything? And Mrs. Kelly looked and saw me, and she did like this. And I said, and she did like this. So I walked through all the others around us and came, and she held both my hands. She said, thank you for coming. She said, Clarence thought the world of you. She said he often came home and we talked about you. Tell me God doesn't enter our lives at some of the most opportune times. And so, although I left the police department under his watch because of race, and him, I have held him responsible at the time. The community in general, with the formation of ad hoc group against crime, and going into the various courts and working with the prosecutor, working with Jed Mishkiff's husband, the late Albert Brooks, matter of fact, that's the last time I was here, I was running from Mary, and Albert brought me here and introduced me to some of you, and Father Pat Rush was then the pastor here. And so the community's been good to me. I have no complaints about the community. I have some complaints about its people, but not the community. So I'm thankful, very thankful. The community's been good to me, and I hope and I pray that I've done something to deserve what they have given me over time. You don't think if you sit on the other side, then you wouldn't sit on this side.
This chair.
You know, move your chair over there.
You should be running for mayor, I'm serious about it. I like Mayor Lucas, but it seems like you're still doing this right.
No way. I'm running from, not for. I lost the mayor's race. I thought that was it.
Okay, this works, mine's off.
Mine is working. A little bit of sound, but, okay. I think it's you.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I'm a little nervous about that. Radioactive. Too many tort cases.
You should just switch with Pat.
Yeah, take my mic.
Great.
We'll figure this out.
Is this working?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I want to go back to a ubiquitous, obviously, theme in the book, and that is your identity as a Black man. And how, over the course of the book, we learn in painful detail all of the experiences you've had, from those that were, we could describe as discouraging, to those that were outright hostile. Your experiences as a boy, your experiences within the police department. And there was one, I mean, there's so many, but I want to draw attention to one that really, I read it and I had to reread it to believe it. There was an incident where you were a cadet and you were having lunch with your sergeant, Sergeant Kennedy. And meanwhile, concurrently, a white woman had her purse snatched by a young Black man. And so she came to the police headquarters, and there was a lineup that was to be formed so that she could perhaps identify the person who had stolen her purse. And the police had a suspect whom they assumed was the person, but they needed 3 other people to be in the lineup. So they chose 2 people who were already in lockup, and they asked you to be the 4th person because you vaguely resembled the suspect. And so there's the lineup, and she identifies you as the person who snatched her purse. And as a result of that, obviously, the thing that's stunning about that entire episode is that the detective who was in charge of the lineup actually went out of his way to ascertain that you actually were sitting with Sergeant Kennedy that day, and that you were having lunch, so that your integrity as a cadet, your integrity as a person, was completely challenged. And so what happens, of course, is that, Sergeant Kennedy explains you were, in fact, having lunch with him in the classroom. And then there's a scene right after that where Mr. Brooks goes down the hall into the bathroom, and he looks in the mirror, and there are tears in his eyes. And he realizes, he'd say, I exhaled and I thanked God. walk out and you run into Sergeant Kennedy, and he says to you, "Oh, I'm really upset with what happened." He says, "I'm pissed," right? And I know how you feel. And your thought was, no, you don't know how I feel. Because if I hadn't been having lunch with you, I'd be down there in lockup with 3 other brothers. So that's just one of many scenes in the book in which obviously you encounter that kind of racism that kind of racism that seems so pervasive. I want to know how you, now, having lived through all those experiences, how have you kept hope alive? How do you encourage younger Black men and women to be hopeful, to be positive? How do you do it?
Well, let me add a little to the story. The reason why I was eating lunch in our classroom, we were on the 4th floor of the police department. That's where the academy was then. As a youngster, I had experienced going to pay the light bill at 1330 Baltimore. And my mother, we caught the streetcar there at Linwood and 31st Street, and went down west and north on Main. We got off at 14th Street, went up, paid the bill, and all these white ladies were sitting around there. And you gave them the money, and they had the quickest machine, and zoop, and it was paid, and they gave you the big part back. And we went, did some shopping, and Mother Ben would always stop at Kresge's. That's the only place, if you were Black, you could eat downtown, standing up there, right off the alley at Kresge's. And I love those segregated hot dogs and that segregated Coke. I loved it. So I could pay the light bill every day. When I became old enough, my mother would let me go by myself. Give me a quarter. Now, I wasn't 12 years old. At that time, you could ride for free if you weren't 12, but sometimes the streetcar conductor would make you pay if you were Black. Now, we knew that because I rode with my white friends, and when I got there, he'd ask for the fare, and we'd get off because we thought we could ride free, and I didn't have any money, so we all got off. But one day in my anxiety, those of you who have read the book, I made a mistake when I got old enough to go downtown for myself. I got off at 13th and Main. Coke on and hot dog on my mind. I went into this building, and when I got inside, everything had changed. There were no women around to take any money for that, and these fellows with these tall hats and uniform in the Kansas City Club. And there were men sitting all around, and boy, they jostled me, they called me everything, little Black Sambo, little nigger baby, and all those kind of things. They took my head and rubbed their knuckles across my head for good luck and all like that. And then they took me outside and they picked me up and like they were going to throw me out in the street. The little money that I had to change part of it flew everywhere. And a Caucasian lady drove by, and she said, got out of the car, she said, "What are you doing, this little boy? Why are you treating him like that?" She admonished them. They went outside and they were laughing, just standing inside. She gave me her handkerchief, wiped my nose and my eyes, and told me to keep the handkerchief. She asked me my name and where I live and my age, and I knew all of that. She said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Kresge's." She said, "Well, what are you doing in there?" And I said, "I went to pay the light bill." She said, "Well, that's down there." She said, "But I'm going to Kresge's." So she drove around the corner, and just as I said, "There it is, just ready to get out." She said, "Wait just a minute." She reached in her purse and grabbed a quarter. Now, I got 40 cents worth of segregated hot dogs. So she said, I went across the street and I spent it all. I get back home. My mother, as always, "Baby, did you pay the light bill?" "Yes, ma'am." Now, see, I had an IQ of 450. Because it was ritual that when I paid or when we paid the light bill, you put the receipts on the scarf in the back of her dresser. So what I did, I put the money and the full bill back there. About 10 days, 2 weeks, we got a cut-off notice. She said, "Baby, did you pay the light bill?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Go get the receipt." Well, my 440 IQ popped up, so I tore off that big boy. And took it to I said, here it is, Mom. And she looked at it, and she ran her hand across, and she read it. She said, baby, they didn't mark page. I said, yes, it did. I read it. And she said, baby, what happened? That's what I told her what happened. My mother never used the term. She didn't know anything about racism. She knew about discrimination and segregation and what's wrong and what's right. And that's when she had me get out on my knee, sang a little bit of Precious Lord, Take My Hand, read a little scripture, and then say, God, help my baby to become the kind of man that you want him to be. How many times did my mama pray that prayer? That even when I was young, I knew I could be saved. Now, I had said to God and a few other responsible people, when I went downtown, I would never eat downtown because in 1954, there was no public accommodation. It was still segregated downtown, only Christies. There were 29 of us in class. I was the only black cadet. Now, they could fan off any place, and eat wherever their money would allow them to, but I couldn't. So I refused. That's why I brought my lunch. Sometimes Sergeant Kennedy was, I think, feel sorry to bring his lunch. We'd sit in that class when they have small talk. And when it finished, I'd walk around the courthouse over to City Hall and there in the police station. But I'm glad that day I stayed inside. And I said this. If a white woman in Kansas, Missouri, in 1954, said that a black man did something to her at 12th and Main at high noon, and he didn't have a witness like Sergeant Jim Kennedy, he would have been way down in jail and in prison. It just so happened that I stayed, that I ate with Sergeant Kennedy. And when we came out of lineup, the detective never said to me that I was identified. He said, "What were you doing the lunch hour?" I said, "I was up in the classroom eating lunch with Sergeant Kennedy." He said, "Well, sit right here." So he set me in the interrogation room. About 10 or 15 minutes he came back. He said, "Come on, go with me." So as soon as we go into the room, the lady said, "That's him. That's the Negro boy. That's him. He's the one that knocked me down and took my purse. He's the one." And my heart dropped. And I started to walk forward, and the detective put his hand, he's standing there just a minute. So he walked over and called my name. No, he said, "No, he's not the one that did that. His name is Alvin Brooks. He's a police cadet. He was upstairs with his son." Then she wanted to apologize, and then you know what I wanted to say. But I did go upstairs. I walked up the 2 flights to the 4th floor, and my class was still in session. I went to the bathroom, and I looked in the mirror, and I said, "Thank God." And tears, I couldn't fight the tears, and I was flashing what I couldn't fight the tears. And finally I took the towel, and just as I walked out, my class was getting a break. And, "Brooks, where you been?" This kind of thing, and I didn't say anything. And just as I got to the door going back into class, that's when the sergeant said, Lorraine said, and he asked me, he said, "You want to go home?" I said, "Oh, no." So I said, "Okay." That was an experience for me, because I had seen, after I got on later, how white officers were treating black men in particular. And I just thank God. And when I went home, I told my wife about that, and we prayed about that, because just that quick from being not only accused but convicted in this city, and just thank God that I was there that day.
Well, that was an amazing story, and kind of brings us to the next topic, which I think is sort of the final topic that we'll discuss tonight, which is forgiveness. Throughout your book, the theme of forgiveness is consistently there. It's present almost in every one of the stories. And you talked about the Kansas City Club, and wouldn't mind hearing how that came full circle down the road, because it's a beautiful story. But then also, I think it'd be remiss not to bring up the story of the woman who your mom used to work for. And the comment that she made when you were, I think, a 10-year-old boy, when was it her grandson?
Grandson.
Her grandson was taking little sips, little spoonfuls of coffee, and she made a disparaging comment suggesting that if he kept doing that, he'd be your color. And how that affected you, and how that's just one of those things that it seems that people casually did, similar to what you dealt with at the Kansas City Club when you were a young boy. And so you tell the stories without anger, without vindictiveness, without any sort of thing other than love in your heart throughout that entire book. But how is it that you could forgive all of the transgressions that you dealt with and continue to deal with, but every day when you were a child and throughout your adulthood, when you're in the police force, when you're trying to deal with things, how does forgiveness play a role in your life, and how have you been able to forgive?
Well, I think it's based on my faith, but let me just quickly end up the story on the Kansas City Club.
I want that other story too. I know it's in the book, but I know I put 2 in there.
Okay. You should have asked only one.
I'm sorry. I'm a rookie. Lorraine's good at this.
A friend of mine who's a lawyer asked me to speak to a group of realtors at the Kansas City. I didn't know the Kansas City. He said, Brooks, it's my time to bring in a speaker. And he said, we never had a black speaker to come in. About 80 people, he said. And he said, I'd like you to be our speaker. And he said, we're going to talk about, I was director of human relations, and he said, talk about the state of Kansas City and all that. I said, okay. And so I said, where is it? He said, Kansas. I said, no. I said, I promise God and a few other responsible people never, no. Hell, you got to go. And he said, why? And I told him the story. He said, Hal, you got to go and tell that story. I did. And there were about 5 women, 70-some men. And one woman, all white, jumped up crying and went outside. But I could see her peeping every once in a while back in. So when I ended, a few people stood, others left. Several came up and said, enjoyed your speech, which did make me too happy. I don't want you to enjoy what's wrong when it's told. But they said that. And so there were still a dozen or so people, and she'd come up to me, and after we'd been in the line, she said, Mr. Brooks, can I give you a hug? I said, yeah. I said, yes, I'm kidding. I said, yes. So she hugged me, she said, I want to apologize for what we did to you when you were a child. And I hope you'll accept my apology. I said, accept your apology. So she left. About 3 weeks later, I get a membership card into the Kansas City Club. So I called my friend. I said, hey, man, why did you take a membership out of me to Kansas? He said, what the hell are you talking about? I don't have enough money to join the Kansas City Club. I said, come on. He said, no. I said, I got the card right there. In fact, I got it in my pocket right now. I carry it around. It's almost ready to disintegrate, but I carry it. And he said, I bet it was, he said, I don't know her name. She's not a member, but she was there as somebody's guest. I bet she bought you membership in that club. My mother worked for a lady who was a working class family during the war, Second World War. And this lady had twin grandkids and the baby. Her son was in service. Her daughter-in-law worked at the Pratt Whitney plant out at 85th and Tribute. So on Saturdays, I would go out with my mother. She worked a half day, and I would cut the yard, depending upon the time of year, sweep the porch, sweep the sidewalk, and wash the windows and little stools and this kind of thing. That's why I got my first bicycle for 75 cents. And so, before we started our chores, our work, my mother and Miss So-and-so would sit at the kitchen table and drink coffee and small talk. And her grandson and granddaughter were twins, Gerald and Geraldine. And there's a baby who was a baby. And oftentimes, Gerald, when he got through with his coffee, a forgot to do his milk, would go to either my mother's cup or his grandmother's cup and dig the coffee out and put it into the glass and drink it. And one morning, she said to Joe, "You keep drinking that coffee, you're going to turn the color of Alvin." My mother was a fair complexioned woman. She could pass for white. She turned flush. And she said, "Well, baby, let's go to work." She jumped up like that. So I did what I had to do. At noon, we were waiting for the streetcar at 36th and Prospect. And I said, "Mother, what did Mrs. So-and-so say to me when she said this morning?" And my mother said, "You'll understand one day, baby." My mother began to cry. You know the ritual. When we got to 31st Street, we caught the 31st Street car and went on out. And as soon as we got home, we pulled everything. We sat down in that old green line rocking chair, picked up the Bible, read a couple of verses, sang and sang that prayer. In 1972, I think it was, I was speaking at a Presbyterian church over in Johnson County at their Sunday afternoon service. And I was talking about the state of Kansas City 4 years after the riot, white flight to the Johnson County and farther south and all those kind of things. And just as we were doing, we'd eaten dinner, and then I'd spoken, and then the pastor was getting ready to do somewhat of a benediction. Two people came, there was a mic in the middle of the floor where people came up to ask questions or their comments. And so I saw this couple, elderly lady and another lady with her, coming up, and she said, "Pastor so-and-so, could you hold up," the people began to put their coats on, "Could you hold up on the prayer, please? My grandmother wants to say something to Mr. Brooks." That was the woman who said on that day, that Saturday, to her grandson. And I'm so glad I didn't mention her name. I didn't mention it tonight either. I'm so glad, and God, she said, "I loved Estelle, and Alvin, I love you, and I just, please forgive me. Just please forgive me. I could not imagine what I said would hurt you as a 10-year-old, because the twins and I were the same age." And she said, "Please forgive me." And I said, "Yes, I forgive you." And everybody, if you own a Kleenex factory, you could have made a lot, because it was everybody that we went to this. And on the way home, my wife said, "Aren't you glad that you didn't mention her name?" Now, it's interesting. My dad, my biological father, 9 years after my biological mother found me in 1954. In 1963, or earlier than that, she found my biological father. He came to Kansas City, made a couple of trips. And he was out unbeknownst to me. He and my wife had figured this out. He was going to try to buy a house so he could move his family to Kansas City from Miami, Florida, Dade County. And he was walking around, looking at home, just walking around, and he saw this sign, "For sale by owner." So he goes up and knocks on the door, and he said, "You know, my name is Wilbur Herring, and I see you got a sign. I'm interested in buying a house because I'm trying to live close to my son." She said, "What's your son's name?" She said, "Alvin." He said, "Oh, I know Alvin, yes." And that was the same woman. Doesn't God work in a mysterious way?
And so, kind of building off of that forgiveness theme, one of the things we talk about, I think, is that, you know, when we forgive, it requires us to do some self-reflection and to do some self-examination. And I think this is a nice time for us to kind of move to another part of the evening. And once again, I mean, we've loaded this program with me asking you to tell 2 stories at once, so I'm gonna have to figure out how to pull this off. But as we start looking at self-reflection and self-examination, one of the other stories that really, I think, struck a chord with the members of the faith formation team within your book was the circumstance where you were leaving a sociology class to go hang out at a bar, to have a conversation at a bar with your classmates following class. And this is, I believe, in 1963. I think it's early 60s, right?
Yes.
And if you could just kind of relay that story, and then I'm going to have another follow-up with you that kind of touches on that theme a little bit
Why
more.
don't you ask that one too? And I
All right, I'm trying to make sure I don't do wrong by that one, it's okay. And then, as we talk about that theme and that story, then I'd like to kind of have you reminisce on a story that just comes back, I believe, from a month ago, and where we are with respect to that story.
Dr. Ed Talmadge was my professor at UMKC, sociology. I was working a master's degree. It took me a lifetime to finish it, but we'd always take off and go down to the pub on Tuesday. I forget the name of it. And this particular day, it was warm, and so one of the classmates said, "How many want to go with me?" He had a convertible. So I raised my hand, and three other persons, white females, raised their hand. And so I got in the back with two of the white females. Just as we got to Volker and Truce, going north, police officer pulled up on the side. We were in the center, and this lane, he pulled up a curb. And I said to the driver, I said to everybody, I said, that police officer's gonna stop us. They said, why is he gonna stop us? The police officer's gonna stop us. Mark my word. So we pulled off, and the police officer stayed until we got and pulled over in the right lane to go. And then he put the light on and siren. Now the driver was irate. Why'd you stop us, so and so and so forth? I said, cool it, man, cool it. So he made everybody get out the car. I was a detective, had my gun. So he had the driver and myself at the hood, with our hands on the hood. And I said, officer, my name is Alvin Brooks. I'm a detective on the Kansas Reserve Police Department. So he put his hand on his gun. And I said to myself, is this man gonna shoot me? So I said, before you do anything else, call your sergeant. Please call your sergeant before you do anything else. I'm not gonna move, I'm not gonna tell you anything else, I'm not gonna do anything. Call your sergeant. Well, my classmate, who was in his 40s, and if not older, kept, I said, man, please, don't say anymore. Please, just hold out. I said, call your sergeant. So by that time, the second car came up. He called for the second car. Well, by that time, they did call the sergeant. The sergeant came. Happened to have been one of my classmates. And he said, what the hell is going on? And I didn't say anything. He said, I told the second car, you go get back in service. He said, everybody get off the car. The rest of you getting back in the car. And I said, Sergeant, I called him by, I didn't call him by his name. And I said, ask the officer. And the officer had nothing to say. He could not say why he stopped us. He said, tell you what you do. You stay out of service, go somewhere and write me a report on why you stopped Detective Alvin Brooks and for the persons here at such a time. And he said, I'll deal with that later. And so he said, Al, would you mind sticking around with me a little bit, let them go on? I said, that's fine. So we sat in the police car in front of the club. Last month I got a call from a grandmother whose grandson, they lived in Clay County. And her grandson, and with the grandson, both parents and the grandmother lived together. They've been there for years. Her grandson is 17. He has a white female friend. They weren't dating, but they're very close. They're just good friends. They work at the same fast food. So she wanted to talk to his mother about something. She's a homeless single parent, 3 or 4 of the kids. Well, when they got there, the mother was not at home. So she just talked to the grandmother. Father was there. And the boy was driving. She's 18, senior, he's 17, and a junior at one of the high schools up the river. And so she got through talking, and they were just there, and they said, so the dad said, hey, it's almost 10 o'clock, it's time for you to go. So he said to his son, it's time for you to take her home. So on the way, but here's the thing, this is the difference between being black and being white in America. He said to his son, remember what I always tell you. If you get stopped by the police, here's what to do. You know what to do? Tell me what to do. I'm to pull over, turn the motor off, put my emergency lights on, turn the dome light on, put my hands on the steering wheel and don't move. And don't question the officer at all. Yes, sir, no, sir, yes, sir. So he left, but they stopped by a quick trip to get a drink, 2 drinks. And just as they were there, and there was a sheriff's car parked in the back of the lot. So when they took off to take her home, pretty soon, the sheriff's car followed him, and he said to her, I think that police car is following, he said, police car is following us. And they were just scared as could be, 17, 18 years old. And so the police officer pulled his, turned his light on, never hit the siren. And so he did everything his dad told him to do. And so the young lady had, and his dad asked her this, have you got your cell phone? Yes. So when the young lady turned hers on the record, the officer came up, it was the sheriff. Let me see your driver's license and your insurance. And so by that time, the second car had come up, and they think it was a Kansas City police officer. It was a female. And she's carrying her hand on the gun. And the young lady could see that she was right there with the window, with a flashlight with her hand on the gun. And so he took this back. He said, whose car is this? He said, my dad's, sir. Where are you going? I'm going to take whatever name home. Where have you been? I just come from my home. What are you doing in Quick Trip? He said, I was getting a drink when you were sitting back there. And he took that, went back, and come back. And he said, you got any drugs in the car? He said, no, sir. He said, how far is it? He said, where do you say you're going? And he said, what's your name? And he took both of their names. Your parents knew you were out? He didn't say do your parents know who you're out with. But do your parents know who you're out, that you're out? The same thing, he left out with. And she said, well, he asked, where have you been? She said, at his house. Your parents know that? 2021, September. Good old USA. Land of the free, home of the brave. And I said, yes, sir. You kids go on and make sure you take her straight home. And he said they followed her. And I just talked to her last night after our Monday chat. And he followed her all the way to her house. And he got out and walked up to the door. And he got back in his car. And then went on back home. So maybe, you mentioned it, all about self-reflection, self-examination. Is there the possibility that this nation of ours never intended for the descendants of slaves to be totally free? Is there a possibility? The Emancipation Proclamation, Executive Order by Lincoln in 1963. 13th Amendment freed the slaves. 14th Amendment made them citizens. 15th Amendment, the right to vote. But in between there, in 1857, there was Dred Scott case that originated right here in the state of Missouri in St. Louis. Dred Scott was a slave, and his owner was a doctor, and the doctor moved from Illinois and I think to Wisconsin back to Missouri, and Dred Scott wanted to go to court and say that since he's gone to a free state, that he should be free. Roger B. Taney, a good Catholic, was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I think it was a 7-2 vote. And the Chief Justice gave the majority opinion that no black man had rights that a white man needed respect, 1857. (1896), Plessy versus Ferguson, where Plessy was a black man who wanted to buy a train in New Orleans owned by the Ferguson company. He didn't go to the colored cars. Somewhere in the literature I read that they said he was 1/32nd Negro. Now, how they knew that, didn't have any DNA, I don't know. But he went to court. And that Supreme Court again said, that as long as it's separate, as long as it's equal, it can be separate. Then on May 17th, 1954, Brown versus Board of Education took place at Topeka, Kansas, landmark case, that there shall be desegregation in education with all deliberate speed. And today, there's as much segregation in public education as there was in 1954. Is that a possibility? But this nation of ours is structurally racist, and that it was never intended to give descendants of slaves full citizenship. We passed laws, and when I was a spokesperson for Obama for the Western District of Missouri, and when I stood on that mall that particular cold day in January 2009, an old man as I was, cold, crying, when my sister Aretha Franklin sang her song with a beautiful purple hat, and he put his name on the Bible. And you know, the Justice John Roberts did not remember the line, and Obama had to help him the line to swear him in, and they had to do it again the next morning just in case somebody called tech. But I said, this is it. America has arrived, because black folks could not have elected Barack Hussein Obama without white folks voting. I said, this is it. People all over the world. I was among a group of gay people from Australia. And they came all the way to see this landmark decision of a black president. I said, God, this is it. But that didn't change one thing. That didn't change one. That evening, the senator and the congressman got together with 14 other people and decided that Obama would have only one term. He hadn't even had a chance to serve. Hadn't taken office. It's just been sworn in. Now, why did they decide that Obama would not be elected the second term? It wasn't because he was a Democrat, because there have been other Democrats. It was because of his wife, Michelle, being a beautiful woman, black woman, the two beautiful kids, a dog, and Bright himself as well as his wife, or was it because he was black? You decide that. Is there the possibility? This nation ran free home of the brave. Never, because of its structural racist system, is it structurally racist. And because of that, it never intended for African Americans who were descendants of slaves to be totally free. It's time to do self-examination. It's time for America to do self-examination. But it's time for us tonight, because we're people of faith. What role do we as people of faith play in this journey called freedom, justice, and equality? That's the challenge we face. Each one of us. I challenge us. There's a dream in the land with its back against the wall. By mother's name and strain, this dream is sometimes called. There are those that claim this dream for theirs alone. of sin for which we know they must atone. Unless this dream is shared in common like sunlight and like air, this dream will die for lack of substance anywhere. This theory is no frontier tongue, it knows no class, no race. But it cannot be held in one and one place. But today, this dream is bowed with its back against the wall, but to save the one for one, it must be saved for all. Langston Hughes, 1964, black poet, Dream Freedom.
Wow. You also could consider being a pastor of a Catholic church also. I could come every Sunday, which I think I'm supposed to do anyway, technically. We're gonna have a few minutes, just to kind of discuss amongst yourself and what the question that's been presented by Mr. Brooks is, how, as a person of faith, who are compelled by our faith to examine our conscience, how can we be involved in changing where we are now and changing a world that, frankly, as we just heard with the two stories, why are we still here? Why is this something we still struggle with? But anyway, if you take a few minutes with your tables and have that discussion, I know it's not an easy discussion, but maybe take a few seconds to self-reflect and then think about what is it we can do, what's the call for action that we can do in our community to help move things forward in this dialogue.